You're alone, not in the obvious way. You have people around you, people who smile and nod and say they believe in you, but when it actually matters, when you need someone to stand beside you, to vouch for you, to put their own reputation on the line for yours, there's no one. When you announce your ambition, you get polite encouragement followed by silence. When you ask for help, you get excuses wrapped in sympathy. When you succeed, they're happy for you from a distance. When you fail, they're nowhere to be found. You thought building relationships meant building support, but you're learning the hard way that proximity isn't loyalty and friendliness isn't alliance. You're out here alone, and the weight of that realization is crushing because you were taught that success is a team sport, that you need people in your corner, that no one makes it by themselves. And yet here you are by yourself, wondering if you're doomed before you even start. Let me tell you something that will either liberate you or break you, depending on whether you're ready to hear it. You don't need their support. You never did. The entire framework that says you need backers and believers and cheerleaders and advocates, that framework was designed for people who already have power, people who are inheriting systems and maintaining structures. You are not maintaining anything, you are building from nothing, which means the rules that apply to those inside the citadel do not apply to you outside its walls. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago when he observed that the prince who relies on the support of others builds his fortress on sand. Support is conditional. Support is transactional. Support evaporates the moment supporting you becomes inconvenient or costly. The only thing you can build on is yourself, your capacity, your will, your refusal to stop when everyone else thinks you should. This isn't motivational speaking. This isn't about believing in yourself or manifesting or thinking positive thoughts. This is about understanding the actual mechanics of power when you're starting with nothing. This is about looking directly at your situation. No support, no safety net, no one willing to extend themselves for you. And recognizing that this isn't the obstacle you think it is. It's the advantage you haven't learned to use yet. When Machiavelli wrote The Prince, he wasn't writing for kings who inherited their thrones. He was writing for the ambitious man with nothing but his wits and his will, the man who needed to carve out power in a world that would never voluntarily give it to him. He was writing for you. And his message wasn't find better allies or network harder or wait until people believe in you. His message was this: Fortuna favors the bold who prepare in obscurity, and the man who conquers by his own arms keeps what he takes. The man who conquers by borrowed strength loses everything the moment that strength is withdrawn. Right now, you think your lack of support is your weakness. You think if only you had mentors, investors, sponsors, advocates, then you could do the thing you're trying to do. But here's what you don't see yet. Every person whose support you think you need is a dependency. Every favor you owe is a chain. Every advocate who speaks for you is someone whose opinion of you determines your mobility. When you build on other people's support, you're building on their tolerance, their availability, their continued assessment that supporting you serves their interests. And the moment that calculation changes, and it will change, you collapse. But when you build alone, when you figure out how to move forward with no one backing you, when you develop the skills and systems and strategies that don't require external validation or assistance, you build something that can't be taken away. You build sovereignty, not the comfortable version where you have a safety net and cheerleaders, the real version where you stand on ground you took yourself and no one can remove you from it because you don't owe anyone for the position. This is going to hurt. Building alone hurts in ways building with support doesn't. You'll work longer hours because there's no one to share the load. You'll make mistakes that a mentor might have helped you avoid. You'll face obstacles that could have been bypassed with a well-placed introduction. You'll burn through your own resources, time, money, energy, because you can't offload costs onto others. You'll question whether you're delusional, whether everyone else sees something you don't, whether their lack of support is actually a reflection of your lack of viability. Those questions will come at 3 in the morning when you're exhausted and nothing is working and you're not sure you can continue. That's the price. That's what it costs to build power from nothing. But here's what you get in exchange. You get clarity. When no one supports you, you stop performing for an audience. You stop shaping your vision to fit what you think others will approve of. You stop second-guessing every decision based on what your imaginary board of advisors might say. You just do the work. You make the calls. You test. You fail. You adjust. You move. Without the weight of other people's expectations or the fear of disappointing supporters, you become faster, more adaptable, more willing to take risks that people with something to lose won't take. You also get skill, real skill, the kind that comes from having no choice but to figure it out yourself. When you have support, you can outsource. You can ask for help. You can lean on other people's expertise. But when you're alone, you learn everything. You learn the technical skills because no one else will do the technical work. You learn the business skills because no one else is handling the business. You learn sales, operations, strategy, execution, not from courses or books, but from necessity. And necessity is a better teacher than any mentor because necessity doesn't let you quit or take shortcuts or blame someone else when things don't work. Most importantly, you get proof. Not proof for others, proof for yourself. When you win alone, when you build something from nothing with no one helping you, no one vouching for you, no one giving you opportunities you didn't create, you know in a way that can never be taken from you that you are capable. Not theoretically capable, actually capable. You have evidence that you can identify what needs to be done and do it, that you can face obstacles and overcome them, that you can sustain effort over time even when there's no external validation. That knowledge becomes bedrock. It becomes the foundation you stand on for everything that comes after. Machiavelli wrote that the prince must be both fox and lion, cunning and fierce, strategic and forceful. But he also wrote something more fundamental. The prince must not rely on fortune or the arms of others. He must acquire his own arms, his own strength, his own capacity to defend what he builds. Because fortune changes. Other people's arms get withdrawn. The only reliable foundation is what you develop in yourself. So let's talk about how you actually do this, not in theory, in practice. How do you win when no one supports you? How do you build when you're alone? How do you sustain momentum when there's no one cheering you on and plenty of people quietly hoping you'll fail so they can feel better about not trying themselves? First, you stop waiting for permission. You stop waiting for someone to believe in you enough to give you a shot. You stop waiting for the right connection or the perfect opportunity or the moment when you finally have enough support to move forward. You recognize that permission isn't coming, belief isn't coming, support isn't coming. And you move anyway. Not recklessly, we'll get to strategy, but decisively. You identify the smallest possible version of what you're trying to build, the version you can execute with the resources you have right now, with no help. And you build that, not the dream version. Not the version you'd build if you had funding and team and mentorship. The version you can build alone today with what's in your hands. This is humbling. You probably have a big vision. You probably see something ambitious and meaningful and important. And I'm telling you to build something tiny and crude and maybe embarrassing compared to that vision. But here's what you're actually doing. You're putting points on the board. You're creating evidence that you can execute. You're building the first rung of a ladder that doesn't exist yet. And every small thing you complete alone is proof to yourself and eventually to others that you don't need permission or support to make things happen. Second, you become obsessive about leverage. When you have support, you have access to other people's resources, their time, their money, their networks, their expertise. When you don't have support, you need to find force multipliers that don't require other people's buy-in. That means technology, systems, processes that allow you to do more with less. That means automation where possible. That means figuring out which 20% of activities produce 80% of results and doing only those things, ruthlessly cutting everything else. That means saying no to opportunities that would be great if you had support but are actually just distractions when you're operating alone. Leverage also means positioning yourself, where small actions create disproportionate results. You can't outwork people who have teams. You can't outspend people who have funding, but you can outposition them. You can find the angles they're ignoring because they're too big, too slow, too invested in current approaches. You can exploit inefficiencies they don't notice because they have the luxury of inefficiency. You can move into spaces they've abandoned or never noticed because those spaces didn't seem important enough. And in those spaces, your lack of support is actually an advantage because you have nothing to protect, no stakeholders to placate, no bureaucracy slowing you down. Third, you treat every single interaction as a negotiation, not a request for favor. When you think you need support, you approach people as a supplicant. You ask, you pitch, you hope, you wait to be chosen. And most of the time, you're not chosen because why would they choose you? You're unproven, you're a risk. Supporting you costs them something. Time, credibility, resources, and there's no clear upside. But when you approach every interaction as a negotiation, everything changes. You're not asking for support. You're identifying what the other person needs and offering a trade. You're looking for what they're trying to accomplish and figuring out how helping you helps them, not in some vague future way, but concretely and immediately. This requires you to do research. It requires you to understand their incentives, their constraints, their goals, and it requires you to be useful before asking for anything in return. This is not manipulation. This is basic exchange. Machiavelli was very clear about this. People act in their own interest. They don't support you because you need support. They support you because supporting you advances their position. So your job isn't to convince them you're worthy of charity. Your job is to make supporting you the smart move for them. And when you have no track record, when you have no proof, the only way to do that is to provide value first. Solve a problem they have. Complete a task they need done. Deliver something useful with no strings attached. Then, when you've proven you can execute, you have standing to negotiate for something you need. Fourth, you get comfortable with isolation. Not loneliness, isolation. These aren't the same thing. Loneliness is wanting connection and not having it. Isolation is choosing to operate outside the crowd because the crowd's pace and priorities don't align with yours. When no one supports you, you can either exhaust yourself trying to win support or you can accept the isolation and use it. Isolation means you're not in meetings that don't matter. You're not doing social maintenance to keep relationships warm. You're not performing productivity for people who aren't actually helping you. You're not managing other people's expectations or emotions. You have all your time and all your focus to direct at the work itself. This is an enormous advantage if you can tolerate the psychological weight of it. Most people can't. Most people need regular social validation, regular proof that they're on the right track, regular reassurance that what they're doing matters. When you're alone, you don't get that. You have to generate your own certainty, your own motivation, your own sense of direction. This is much harder than it sounds, but it's also what separates people who build real things from people who build consensus. Fifth, you document everything. When you're building with support, other people can vouch for your progress, your capabilities, your wins. When you're alone, no one is watching. No one is tracking what you're accomplishing, so you track it yourself. Not for external validation, though that may come later, but for internal certainty. You need to know on the hard days when nothing is working and you're questioning everything that you've made progress. You need evidence you can review that proves you're moving forward, even when it doesn't feel like it. Documentation also serves another purpose. It creates the receipts you'll need when people who didn't support you suddenly want to be involved. And they will. Machiavelli observed that everyone wants to be associated with success, but no one wants to be associated with the struggle that creates success. When you start winning, people who ignored you will suddenly remember they always believed in you. People who said no will rewrite history to suggest they said maybe. Documentation protects you from this. It protects you from gaslighting yourself into thinking you didn't do this alone. It protects you from giving credit or access to people who weren't there when the outcome was uncertain. Sixth, and this is crucial, you build redundancy into everything. When you have support, you have backup plans built into the support network. Someone knows someone. Someone can make an introduction. Someone can extend a deadline or provide a bridge loan or offer advice that prevents a fatal mistake. When you're alone, you are the backup plan, which means you need to build margin into everything you do. You need more time than you think you need, more money than the plan requires, more skills than the immediate task demands, more options than you hope to use. This feels inefficient. It is inefficient, but efficiency is a luxury of people who have support systems to catch them when they stumble. When you're alone, stumbling can be fatal because there's no one to break your fall. So you build slower than you'd like. You save more than feels necessary. You learn adjacent skills that might be useful. You develop multiple paths to the same goal so that if one path closes, you're not stuck. This redundancy is what keeps you alive long enough to win. Seventh, you learn to operate in the gap between planning and execution without needing external validation. Most people need someone to approve their plan before they execute. They need a mentor to say it's a good idea. They need a partner to agree it's viable. They need investors to validate it's worth pursuing. And in seeking that validation, they leak energy, waste time, and often compromise the idea until it's something others are comfortable with rather than something that might actually work. When you're alone, you don't have the luxury of validation. You have to develop your own judgment. You have to learn to assess an idea's viability without external input. You have to get comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing if you're right until you've already committed significant resources to finding out. This is terrifying at first. You'll make mistakes. You'll pursue things that don't work. You'll waste time and money on dead ends. But you'll also develop judgment faster than people who outsource that judgment to others. You'll learn to trust your assessment of situations. You'll build the capacity to make decisions under uncertainty without needing someone else to share the risk. Eighth, you weaponize your lack of visibility. When no one supports you, no one is watching you either. You're not under scrutiny. You're not being judged. You're not generating expectations you'll need to meet. You can fail privately. You can experiment without explaining yourself. You can pivot without justifying the change. You can test things that would seem crazy or reckless or naive if you had to defend them to a board or investors or mentors. This invisibility is painful when you want recognition, but it's incredibly valuable when you need freedom to figure things out. Use this time to make all your mistakes. Fail at everything that's going to fail. Test all the bad ideas. Get the experimentation out of your system. Develop your capabilities where no one can see you developing them. Because once you start winning, once people start paying attention, that freedom disappears. Every move gets analyzed. Every failure gets remembered. Every pivot gets questioned. So make the most of your obscurity while you have it. Become dangerously competent where no one is looking. Ninth, you develop a different relationship with time than people who have support. When you have backers, you have timelines, you have quarterly reports, you have expectations about pace and progress. You have pressure to show results quickly enough to justify continued support. This creates artificial urgency that often works against actually building something sustainable. When you're alone, time works differently. You don't have to explain why something is taking longer than expected. You don't have to justify why you're not growing faster. You can take the time things actually take, not the time investors or advisors think they should take. This is both a gift and a danger. The gift is that you can build foundations properly. You can learn skills deeply rather than superficially. You can let ideas develop instead of forcing them into execution before they're ready. The danger is that without external pressure, you can drift. You can let things take longer than they need to. You can confuse patience with procrastination. The way through this is to impose your own structure. You set your own deadlines. You create your own accountability. You track your own metrics, not to perform for others, but to keep yourself honest, because time is the one resource you're spending whether you have support or not, and without external pressure to use it well, you need internal discipline to not waste it. 10th, you learn to metabolize rejection differently than people who have support. When you have advocates, rejection stings, but it's buffered. Someone else believes in you. Someone else thinks you're on the right track. Someone else provides an alternative interpretation of why the rejection happened. When you're alone, rejection lands with full force. No one buffers it. No one reframes it. You have to process it yourself and decide what it means. Most people interpret rejection as evidence they're wrong, they're not good enough, they should quit. But rejection is due ST information. It tells you that particular person or organization or opportunity wasn't aligned with what you're offering at that particular time in that particular way. That's all it tells you. It doesn't tell you whether what you're building is viable. It doesn't tell you whether you should continue. It just tells you that particular path is closed. And when you're building alone, you need to get very good at extracting the useful information from rejection. What can you learn? What can you improve? What can you do differently? While discarding the emotional weight that wants to turn rejection into a referendum on your worth. This is psychological warfare you're conducting against yourself. Your brain will interpret every setback as proof you should stop. Your emotions will use every rejection as ammunition for the argument that you're delusional for trying. You have to develop the capacity to observe those thoughts and feelings without obeying them, to acknowledge the fear and doubt and pain while continuing to execute anyway. This is not positive thinking. This is not denying reality. This is seeing reality clearly. Yes, this is hard. Yes, you're alone. Yes, it might not work. And choosing to continue not because you're certain of success, but because stopping guarantees failure. 11th, you learn to create your own momentum because no one else is going to create it for you. Momentum is the feeling that things are moving, that progress is happening, that you're building towards something. When you have support, other people contribute to that momentum. They provide wins, they open doors, they create opportunities. Their belief and action generate forward motion that you can ride. When you're alone, you generate all the momentum yourself. And here's the hard part. Momentum doesn't come from big wins when you're starting out. Big wins are rare and unreliable. Momentum comes from small, consistent wins that you stack day after day. It comes from making one cold call that doesn't immediately hang up, from finishing one piece of the project, from learning one new skill, from solving one problem you didn't know how to solve yesterday. Each small win is a brick. You're building a wall one brick at a time, and for a long time, it doesn't look like a wall. It looks like a pile of bricks. But you keep stacking, and eventually the pile becomes a structure. This requires you to redefine what counts as progress. If you're measuring yourself against people who have teams and funding and networks, you'll always feel like you're failing. But you're not playing the same game they are. They're playing the game of managing resources and coordinating people. You're playing the game of building capacity from nothing. Different game, different metrics. Your progress is measured in skills acquired, systems built, obstacles overcome, proof generated. Not in growth rates or market share or press mentions. When you're alone, the scoreboard is internal, and the only question that matters is, am I more capable today than I was yesterday? If yes, you're winning. 12th, you learn to distinguish between allies and spectators. This is critical. When you're building alone and people start noticing, some of them will offer encouragement. They'll say they're rooting for you. They'll express admiration for what you're doing. They'll like your posts and share your updates and tell you to keep going. This feels like support. It isn't. It's spectatorship. Spectators watch. Allies act. Spectators consume your content. Allies contribute to your capacity. Most of the people who claim to support you are spectators. They enjoy the narrative of your struggle. They find your ambition inspiring in an abstract way. But if you ask them to do something concrete, make an introduction, provide feedback, commit resources, take a risk on your behalf, they'd have reasons why they can't. And that's fine. You're not entitled to their help. But you need to be clear about what you actually have. You have spectators, not allies. And spectators don't change your material situation. They don't increase your capacity. They don't share your risk. They're just watching to see how the story ends. Real allies are exceedingly rare when you're building from nothing, and you'll know them by their actions, not their words. They're the person who makes the introduction without being asked, the person who gives you feedback that's actually useful even though it takes their time. The person who shows up to help when you need hands and there's nothing in it for them. These people are gold. When you find them, you protect those relationships. You reciprocate. You remember who was there when the outcome was uncertain. but you don't confuse spectators for allies just because they're saying nice things. That confusion will break your heart and waste your time. 13th, you develop a specific kind of anger and you learn to use it as fuel. Not resentment, that's corrosive and unfocused. Not bitterness, that makes you smaller. But a clean, directed anger at the people who counted you out, who didn't see what you saw, who decided you weren't worth their time or attention or resources. You remember every person who said no when you needed yes, every door that closed, every dismissal, every condescending piece of advice from someone who'd never done what you're trying to do. You collect these moments and you use them. Machiavelli wrote extensively about the role of virtue, not virtue in the moral sense, but force of will, the capacity to impose your vision on resistant reality. Part of that force comes from anger, not the kind that makes you reckless, but the kind that makes you relentless, the kind that refuses to quit, because quitting would prove right everyone who didn't believe in you, the kind that gets you out of bed when you don't want to get up, that keeps you working when you're exhausted, that pushes you through obstacles, that would stop someone who didn't have that fire. This is dangerous energy. It can turn toxic if you let it. If you let the anger become identity, if you let proving people wrong become the whole purpose, you'll win and still feel empty because you were building in reaction to others rather than in service to your vision. But channeled correctly, that anger is rocket fuel. It's the thing that keeps you going when inspiration fails, when motivation dries up, when the rational choice would be to quit. You're not doing this because you think it will work. You're doing this because you refuse to give them the satisfaction of watching you fail. 14th, you make peace with the possibility of failure, not by accepting it, but by removing its power over you. When you're building alone, failure is more likely than success. That's just statistics. Most things fail. Most ventures don't work out. Most ambitious attempts end in defeat. When you have support, you have cushions. You have other options. You have people who will help you land softly and regroup. When you're alone, failure could be catastrophic. It could mean financial ruin, wasted years, public humiliation, proof to everyone who doubted you that they were right to doubt. That fear is real and rational, but it's also paralyzing. If you're constantly afraid of failure, you'll make safe choices, tentative moves, you'll protect yourself instead of going all in. And when you're building from nothing, safe choices don't get you anywhere. Safe choices maintain, they don't create. So you need to conduct a very honest reckoning with failure. What's the actual worst case? Not the catastrophic fantasy your brain generates at 3 in the morning, but the real concrete worst case. You lose money. You lose time, you feel humiliated, you have to start over. And then what? You survive, you learn, you build again with more knowledge than you had before. Failure isn't death, it's expensive education. And when you truly internalize that, not as a platitude, but as a lived understanding, fear loses its grip. You can take bigger risks because you've already accepted the worst case and decided you can handle it. This doesn't mean you're reckless, it means you're free. Free to make moves that people with more to lose won't make. Free to test things that conventional wisdom says you shouldn't. Free to commit fully instead of hedging your bets. 15th, you recognize that the people who eventually do support you will be different people than the ones you thought you needed. When you're starting out, you have an idea of who you need in your corner. You need this specific mentor, this particular investor, this certain type of advocate. And when those people say no, it feels like the door closing. But here's what actually happens. You build something despite their no. You prove viability. You generate results. You become someone it's smart to bet on. And different people notice. People you didn't know existed. People who have the exact resources or connections or expertise you need. People who are looking for someone like you because of what you've already built. The support you get after you've proven yourself is qualitatively different from the support you were seeking before you proved yourself. Before, you were asking people to take a risk on an unknown. Now, you're offering people access to something that's already working. The power dynamic is inverted. You're not the supplicant anymore. You're the opportunity, and you get to choose who you work with based on alignment, not based on who was willing to take a chance on you when you were nothing. This is why building alone isn't just a path to success, it's a filtering mechanism. It ensures that the people who eventually join you are the right people. They're not there because you convinced them with a pitch. They're there because they saw what you built and wanted to be part of it. That's a stronger foundation than support that was given before you'd proven anything. 16th, you develop a particular relationship with faith that has nothing to do with religion and everything to do with action in the absence of certainty. When you have support, you have external validation that what you're doing makes sense. Experienced people are backing you. Smart people believe in you. That validation makes it easier to believe in yourself. When you're alone, you have none of that. You have your vision, your assessment, your judgment, and a whole lot of uncertainty. Faith, in this context, is the decision to act as if your vision is viable, even though you have no proof. It's not blind optimism. It's not pretending obstacles don't exist. It's clear-eyed acknowledgement that you don't know if this will work, combined with the decision to find out rather than assume it won't. This is existential work. You're creating something that doesn't exist yet, based on your belief that it should exist. That requires you to operate in the gap between current reality and possible reality. And in that gap, there's no certainty, just choice. You choose to continue, not because you know it will work, but because you don't know it won't. Not because the path is clear, but because standing still is its own kind of failure. Not because anyone is cheering you on, but because you're the only person who can bring this particular vision into reality, and if you don't do it, it doesn't happen. That choice, made repeatedly, daily, in the face of evidence that suggests you should quit, that's faith, and it's the only kind of faith that matters when you're building alone. Now let's talk about what happens when you start winning, because winning alone is different from winning with support, and you need to be prepared for it. When you win alone, when you build something significant with no help, the narrative around you changes. People who ignored you suddenly act like they always saw your potential. People who said no claim they were just waiting for the right timing. People who dismissed you want to tell you their own entrepreneurial dreams. And most disorienting of all, people start treating you like you're somehow special, somehow different from them, as if the thing you did is something they could never do. This is where you need to be careful, because the temptation is to accept that narrative, to believe you are special, to rewrite your own history to align with what people are now saying. But if you do that, you lose the most valuable thing you built, the knowledge of exactly how you did it. You lose the understanding that it wasn't magic or talent or fate. It was specific decisions, specific actions, specific skills developed through specific practice. You lose the roadmap that could guide others or that could guide you when you need to build the next thing. Stay grounded in reality. You won because you worked when others didn't, because you continued when others quit, because you built systems and skills and capacity that others weren't willing to build, because you tolerated uncertainty and isolation and failure in pursuit of something that mattered to you. That's not magic, that's process. And the moment you forget that process, the moment you start believing in your own special destiny, you become fragile, because you've lost sight of what actually created the result. Also, you need to decide what you do with your newfound leverage, because now you have what you didn't have before, options. People want to work with you, opportunities present themselves, resources become available, and you have to choose. Do you bring peep? Len? Do you accept support now that it's offered? Do you maintain the sovereignty you built by staying solo, or do you leverage relationships to build something bigger than you could build alone? There's no universal answer. It depends on what you're building and what matters to you. But here's what Machiavelli would tell you. Never become dependent on support you didn't have when you were nothing. Use resources when they're useful. Form alliances when they're strategic. Accept help when it accelerates your vision. But never let your ability to execute become contingent on someone else's continued involvement. The moment you need someone else to continue operating, you've given them power over you. And power, once given, is difficult to reclaim. The goal isn't to remain alone forever. The goal is to build such a solid foundation in yourself, in your skills, your judgment, your capacity to execute, that you can work alone if you need to, but choose to work with others when it serves your aims. That's sovereignty. Not isolation, but choice. The ability to operate solo if every ally disappeared tomorrow. The knowledge that you could rebuild from nothing because you've already done it once. This is the profound gift of building alone, not success. Success can come from many paths, but unshakable self-knowledge. The certain understanding that you can identify what needs to be done and do it, that you can face obstacles and overcome them, that you can sustain effort over time even when no one is watching, no one is helping, no one believes but you. That knowledge becomes bedrock. It becomes immune to imposter syndrome because you have evidence. It becomes immune to other people's opinions because you've already proven you don't need their validation. It becomes the foundation for everything you build after. So here's what you do. Right now, today, with no support and no one in your corner, you identify the smallest, most concrete step toward the thing you're trying to build. Not the dream version, the version you can execute alone, starting today. And you take that step. You don't announce it. You don't ask permission. You don't seek feedback or validation. You just do the thing. Then tomorrow, you identify the next step, and you take that one. And the day after, the next step. You build one brick at a time while everyone else is talking about building. You develop one skill while others are networking. You solve one problem while others are waiting for someone to solve it for them. Day after day, week after week, month after month, you stack these actions, you accumulate capacity, you generate proof, and somewhere in that process, something shifts. You stop thinking about lack of support as a problem and start seeing it as a filter. The people who weren't there don't get access to what you're building. You stop measuring yourself against people who had advantages you didn't and start measuring yourself against who you were yesterday. You stop seeking validation from outside and start generating certainty from inside based on what you're actually accomplishing. You become dangerous, not in the sense of harmful, but in the sense that you're no longer controllable. You're not waiting for permission. You're not limited by other people's belief in you. You're not dependent on anyone's continued support. You're a force moving through the world based on your own assessment of what should exist, and nothing outside yourself can stop you because you've already proven you don't need anything outside yourself to continue. That's what Machiavelli understood. That's what he was teaching in The Prince. Not how to be cruel or manipulative or political, how to build power from nothing when the world will never voluntarily give it to you, how to develop the kind of self-sufficiency that makes you unbreakable, how to win when no one supports you by building the capacity to win alone, and then, from that position of strength, choosing your allies rather than begging for them. You're alone right now, I know. It's heavy, it hurts, you wish it were different. But what if it's not the obstacle? What if it's the exact condition you needed to forge yourself into someone who can't be stopped? What if everyone who didn't support you did you the biggest favor possible by forcing you to become self-reliant? What if this isolation is the crucible, and what comes out the other side is someone who doesn't need support to win, only wants it on their own terms? That person is being built right now. Every day you continue without support, you're adding to their strength. Every obstacle you overcome alone, you're proving their capacity. Every small win you stack, you're constructing their foundation. That person is becoming inevitable, becoming real, becoming dangerous in the best sense. The question is whether you'll continue long enough to meet them, whether you'll keep building when no one is watching, whether you'll keep executing when no one believes, whether you'll keep showing up when every rational voice says,